The saloon door swung wide as Luke Morrison stumbled through, his spurs jangling against the weathered floorboards. The acrid smell of tobacco smoke and cheap whiskey hung thick in the air, mixing with the sour stench of unwashed bodies. It was past midnight in Cheyenne Creek, Wyoming Territory, and the Golden Horseshoe Saloon was still alive, with the sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter. Luke's blue eyes, usually sharp as a hawk's, were glazed over with drink. At 28, he cut a fine figure even in his intoxicated state, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of countless days under the harsh western sun. His dark hair hung loose beneath his battered Stetson, and his shirt was stained with trail dust and whiskey. "Morrison!" bellowed Jake Hartley from the poker table in the corner. "Get yourself over here, boy! We need fresh money in this game." Luke swayed slightly, gripping the bar for support. He'd been drinking since sunset, trying to drown the loneliness that seemed to follow him like his own shadow. Despite his reputation as one of the best bronc busters in the territory, despite the respect he commanded among other cowboys, the emptiness inside him remained. "I'm coming," he slurred, pushing off from the bar. He fumbled in his vest pocket and pulled out his last $20, his entire month's wages from the Patterson Ranch. The poker table was surrounded by familiar faces: Jake Hartley, a cattle baron with more money than sense; Tom "Snake Eye" Sullivan, a professional gambler with slicked-back hair and cold gray eyes; and Samuel Blackwood, the town banker who enjoyed slumming with the working folk when his wife wasn't watching. "Deal me in," Luke said, dropping heavily into the empty chair. Snake Eye's thin lips curved into a predatory smile. "Well, well," Luke Morrison gracing us with his presence. "You sure you can see the cards straight, cowboy?" "I can see well enough to take your money," Luke shot back, though his words ran together slightly. The game began, and for a while Luke's luck held. The pile of coins and bills in front of him grew steadily. The whiskey made him bold, reckless. He raised when he should have folded, bluffed when he should have played it safe. But somehow, the cards kept falling his way. "Seems Lady Luck's taking a shine to you tonight," Blackwood observed, mopping his sweaty forehead with a silk handkerchief. Luke grinned crookedly. "About time she paid me some mind." But as the night wore on and the whiskey bottle emptied, Luke's fortune began to turn. His pile dwindled, then disappeared entirely. By 3 in the morning, he was down to his saddle, his rifle, and his horse. "I'm out," he said, starting to push back from the table. "Now hold on there," Snake Eye said smoothly. "A man like you doesn't just walk away from the table, not when he's been winning all night. Tell you what, I'll spot you 100 for one more hand. Winner takes all." Luke knew he should leave. Every instinct honed by years of survival on the frontier screamed at him to walk away. But the whiskey had made him stupid, and his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of these men. "What's the catch?" he asked, suspiciously. Snake Eye's smile widened. "No catch, just a little condition. If you lose, you do whatever I say. One thing, no questions asked." Jake Hartley chuckled. "Better be careful, Morrison. Snake Eye's got a twisted sense of humor." "Nothing illegal," Snake Eye added, spreading his hands innocently. "Just a bit of entertainment for the good folks of Cheyenne Creek." Luke stared at the gambler through blurry eyes. $100 was more than he'd see in 3 months of hard work. If he won, he could finally save enough to buy that little spread he'd been dreaming about. "Deal," he said. The crowd in the saloon had grown, word spreading that something interesting was happening at the poker table. Men pressed in close, breathing whiskey fumes and anticipation. Snake Eye dealt the cards with practiced ease. Luke picked up his hand. 2 pairs, kings and sevens. Not bad, not great, but not bad. The betting was fierce. Snake Eye raised. Luke called. Cards were discarded, new ones drawn. Luke kept his pairs, drawing 1 card. Another 7. Full house. His heart pounded as he pushed the borrowed money to the center of the table, all in. Snake Eye studied him for a long moment, those cold gray eyes searching for any tell. Finally, he matched the bet. "Show him!" someone called from the crowd. Luke laid down his cards triumphantly. Full house. 7s over kings. For a moment, silence fell over the saloon. Then Snake Eye began to laugh, a sound like grinding glass. Well, well, well. The gambler laid down his own cards one by one. 4 queens. Looks like you lose, cowboy. The blood drained from Luke's face as the reality hit him. He'd lost everything, his money, his gear, and now he owed this snake whatever he demanded. Now then, Snake Eye said, lighting a cigar with deliberate slowness. About that condition? You know the widow Johnson, the colored woman who lives out by Copper Creek? Luke nodded mutely. Everyone knew Amara Johnson, the beautiful young woman whose husband had died in a mine collapse 6 months ago. She kept to herself mostly, trying to scratch out a living on the small plot her husband had left her. You're going to marry her, Snake Eye announced. The saloon erupted. Men hooted and hollered, slapping their knees at what they saw as the ultimate humiliation for a white cowboy. You can't be serious, Luke protested, suddenly feeling more sober than he had all night. Deadly serious. You gave your word, Morrison. Or you the kind of man who goes back on his word? Luke's jaw clenched. In the West, a man's word was his bond. Break it, and you might as well leave the territory entirely. She won't agree to it, he said desperately. Oh, I think she will, Blackwood interjected. You see, I hold the note on her land. Either she marries you by week's end, or I foreclose. I've already had my lawyer draw up the papers. Luke's stomach churned as he realized he'd been set up from the beginning. Why, he asked. What's your game? Snake Eye blew smoke rings toward the ceiling. Let's just say certain parties have an interest in that land. This way, everyone gets what they want. Blackwood gets his foreclosure one way or another, and we all get the entertainment of watching Luke Morrison tied to... He paused, savoring the moment. Someone beneath his station. The crowd laughed again, uglier this time. Luke saw the faces around him clearly now. The prejudice, the cruelty, the small-mindedness of men who needed someone to look down on to feel big. I need some air, he muttered, stumbling toward the door. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and crisp. Luke leaned against the hitching post, fighting down the urge to vomit. What had he done? In one drunken night, he'd destroyed not just his own life, but potentially that of an innocent woman. 3 days later, Luke stood in the small wooden church at the edge of town, stone-cold sober, and dressed in his only clean shirt. The pews were packed with townspeople who had come to witness what they saw as the joke of the century. The door opened, and Amara Johnson entered. Luke's breath caught. He had seen her from a distance before, but up close, her beauty was striking. She moved with quiet dignity, despite the circumstances, her head held high. She wore a simple blue dress that had been carefully mended, and her dark hair was pulled back neatly. But it was her eyes that held him, deep brown, filled with intelligence and a fierce pride that no hardship had dimmed. She was accompanied by Reverend Mills, who looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. As she approached the altar, Luke could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her small bouquet of wildflowers. Miss Johnson, Luke said quietly when she reached him, I'm sorry about this. Save it, she said, her voice low but firm. We both know why we're here. Let's just get this over with. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Mills rushed through the vows as if the words themselves were distasteful. When he reached the part about objections, the church erupted in laughter. No objections here, Reverend, someone called. This is the best show we've had all year. Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. Luke felt a surge of unexpected admiration for her composure. When Reverend Mills pronounced them man and wife, the church bells rang out over Cheyenne Creek. The sound seemed to mock them, echoing across the valley like laughter. As they turned to face the congregation, Luke caught Amara's eye. Something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. They were both victims here, caught in a game neither had chosen to play. Luke offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. As they walked down the aisle through the jeering crowd, he leaned close and whispered so only she could hear. Cowboy lost a bet, forced to wed a black beauty. But maybe the game's not done yet. She looked up at him sharply, searching his face for mockery. Finding none, she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Together they stepped out of the church and into the harsh Wyoming sun, bound now by law if not by choice, facing an uncertain future in a land that seemed determined to see them fail. The wedding night arrived with a cold wind whistling through the cracks in Luke's cabin walls. The small wooden structure sat lonely on the prairie, 5 miles from town, surrounded by nothing but sagebrush and distant mountains. Luke had built it himself 3 years ago, never imagining he'd bring a bride here under such circumstances. Amara stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by moonlight. She hadn't spoken during the wagon ride from town, maintaining a dignified silence that made Luke more uncomfortable than any angry words could have. "It's not much," Luke said, lighting a kerosene lamp. The yellow glow revealed the sparse interior. A bed in one corner, a pot-bellied stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding a few dishes and supplies. "I've seen worse," Amara replied, stepping inside. She set down her small carpet bag, apparently all she'd been allowed to bring from her previous home. An awkward silence stretched between them. Luke busied himself stoking the fire in the stove while Amara stood near the door, arms wrapped around herself, though the night wasn't particularly cold. "Look," Luke began, turning to face her. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted. I'll sleep in the barn. You can have the cabin." "No," her voice was firm. "People will talk. They're already watching, waiting for us to fail. I won't give them more ammunition." Luke studied her in the lamplight. Even in her simple dress, there was something regal about her bearing. "Why did you agree to this?" he asked quietly. "You could have fought Blackwood in court." A bitter smile touched her lips. A colored widow fighting a white banker in Wyoming Territory? "How do you think that would have ended, Mr. Morrison?" He had no answer for that. They both knew the truth of it. Luke gestured awkwardly toward the bed. "You take it. I'll make a pallet by the stove." "Thank you," she said quietly, the first soft words she'd spoken to him. As Luke spread out blankets on the floor, Amara unpacked her few belongings. He noticed how carefully she handled each item: a worn Bible, a silver hairbrush, a small framed photograph. When she pulled out a quilt, obviously handmade with intricate patterns, Luke recognized quality work. "Did you make that?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprised by the question. "My mother taught me. She was a seamstress before." She trailed off. "It's fine work," Luke said honestly. "My ma used to quilt. Never saw patterns quite like those, though." "They're from my mother's mother," Amara said, running her hand over the fabric. African patterns passed down and changed over time. It was the most she'd said about herself, and Luke found himself curious despite the awkwardness. But the moment passed, and she turned away, hanging the quilt carefully on a peg. They prepared for bed in silence, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. Luke lay on his hard pallet, staring at the ceiling rafters, listening to the soft rustle as Amara settled into the bed. The cabin felt smaller than ever, with 2 people in it. "Mr. Morrison." Her voice came soft in the darkness. "Luke," he corrected. "Might as well use first names, considering." "Luke, then. I want to be clear about something. This marriage may be forced, but I won't be." "That is, I don't expect." "I understand," Luke said quickly, saving them both the embarrassment. "Like I said at the church, maybe the game's not done yet. We'll figure out how to get through this with our dignity intact." "Dignity," she repeated, and he heard a world of meaning in that single word. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of their situation. Luke woke to find Amara already up, kindling the fire in the stove. She moved efficiently around the small space, and he smelled coffee brewing. "You didn't have to," he began. "I pay my way," she interrupted. "I won't be a burden." They ate a simple breakfast in silence, biscuits Amara had made from Luke's meager supplies, and the last of the bacon. Luke noticed she took only a small portion for herself. "We need supplies," he said finally, "and you'll need things, clothes and such. We should ride to town." Amara's shoulders tensed. "I have what I need." "No, you don't," Luke said firmly. You're my wife now, at least in the eyes of the law. That means what's mine is yours. We're going to town, and you're going to get what you need." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to puzzle him out. "Why are you doing this?" Quote, Luke pushed back from the table. "Because it's the right thing to do. This situation isn't your fault any more than it's mine." He gave a faint, lopsided smile. "Besides, if we're going to be the talk of the town anyway, might as well give them something worthwhile to gossip about." An hour later, they rode toward town on Luke's horses, him on his bay gelding, Amara on the gentler mare he used for pack work. She sat the horse well, he noticed, with natural grace. "You ride like you were born to it," he commented. My late husband taught me," she said. "He said a woman needed to be able to take care of herself out here." "Smart man," Luke said quietly. The simple words carried a weight of grief that made him wish he hadn't brought it up. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, brown grass rippling like waves in the wind. Purple mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with snow, though it was only early fall. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. "It's beautiful," Amara said suddenly. "Hard and unforgiving, but beautiful." "Most folks just see the hard part," Luke replied. "Takes a certain kind of person to see the beauty, too." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. Luke found himself stealing glances at Amara. The way she held herself in the saddle, the way the wind caught strands of her hair that had escaped from her bonnet. As they neared town, Luke's jaw tightened. He could already see people gathering on the boardwalk, pointing and whispering. News of their arrival had preceded them like wildfire. "Here we go," he muttered. "Let them look," Amara said, lifting her chin. "I've faced worse than small-minded gossip." They hitched their horses in front of Henderson's general store. As they climbed the steps, Martha Henderson appeared in the doorway, her pinched face a mask of false sympathy. "Why, Luke Morrison! What a surprise to see you in town so soon after your wedding," she said sweetly. Her gaze slid to Amara with barely concealed contempt. "And you've brought your wife." "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Luke said evenly. "We need supplies." Inside the store, other customers stopped their shopping to stare. Luke ignored them, guiding Amara to the fabric section. "Pick what you need," he said, "and don't skimp. Winter's coming and you'll need warm clothes." Amara hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention and the charity, but practicality won out. She began examining the fabrics with a practiced eye. "That calico's poor quality," observed a familiar voice. Luke turned to see Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, wife of the rancher he worked for. Unlike the others, her expression was thoughtful rather than hostile. "The blue wool is much better, dear. It'll last through winter and beyond." Amara looked surprised at the kindness. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "My husband speaks highly of your husband, Mrs. Morrison. Luke's one of our best hands." It was the first time anyone had called Amara by her married name with respect. Luke saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. They finished their shopping with minimal incident, though the whispers followed them like shadows. At the feed store, old Charlie Banks refused to serve them until Luke fixed him with a hard stare. At the butcher shop, they were told the best cuts were already spoken for, though Luke could see them plain as day in the case. The final stop was the bank. Luke needed to withdraw money for the supplies, and Blackwood himself emerged from his office, oily smile in place. "Ah, the happy couple," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "How wonderful to see you adapting to married life. I trust there are no difficulties?" Luke's fists clenched, but Amara placed a gentle hand on his arm. The touch surprised him. The first time she'd reached out voluntarily. "No difficulties at all, Mr. Blackwood," she said smoothly. "In fact, we're quite content. Disappointment must be hard for you to bear." Blackwood's smile faltered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I'm sure you don't," Amara agreed pleasantly. "Good day, sir." As they loaded their purchases onto the pack horse, Luke couldn't help but grin. That was well done. Old Blackwood looked like he swallowed a lemon. "Men like him expect people like me to cower," Amara said. I learned long ago that dignity is sometimes the sharpest weapon we have." The ride home was quieter, both lost in thought. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly, and dust devils danced across their path. Luke noticed Amara swaying slightly in the saddle. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" he asked suddenly. She stiffened. "I manage fine." "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, 3 days before the wedding, "I sold most of my stores to pay for the dress." Luke cursed under his breath. "Why didn't you say something?" "Pride, I suppose," she admitted. "The same pride that's kept me going this far." When they reached the cabin, Luke insisted she rest while he tended the horses and unpacked the supplies. He put together a meal from what they'd bought, nothing fancy, but filling. As they ate, some of the tension between them eased. "Thank you," Amara said as she finished her plate. "For today, you didn't have to stand up for me in town." "Yes, I did," Luke replied. "We might not have chosen this, but we're in it together now. The way I see it, we can either make each other miserable or find a way to make it work." She studied him across the table. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone crueler, I suppose." Most men would be furious at being forced into this situation. "I was furious," Luke admitted. "Still am, at Snake Eye and Blackwood. But not at you. You're as much a victim as I am." "Victim," she repeated thoughtfully. "I've been called many things, but I don't care for that word. It implies helplessness." "What would you prefer?" Quote, a small smile, the first real one he'd seen from her. Survivor. That night, as they settled into their respective sleeping arrangements again, the silence felt less strained. They were still strangers bound by an unwanted marriage, but perhaps they didn't have to be enemies. "Luke." Amara's voice came through the darkness. "Yeah? That thing you said at the church, about the game not being done, what did you mean?" Luke stared up at the rafters, thinking. "I meant that Snake Eye and Blackwood might think they've won, but I don't give up that easy. This isn't over." "Good," she said softly. "Because neither do I." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside the small cabin, for the first time since their forced marriage, there was a sense of possibility. They might have been pushed together by other men's cruelty, but perhaps they could forge something stronger from it. The game, indeed, was not done yet.